Good morning. My name is Kevin Lee. I'm the CEO of the Canadian Home Builders Association, or CHBA, and thank you for being here today. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that today's press conference is taking place on the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. As a Canadian Home Builders Association, we acknowledge from coast to coast the ancestral territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home as we move forward in a spirit of collaboration with all of Canada's Indigenous peoples. CHBA has been the voice of the residential construction in Canada since 1943. Our members build all forms of housing, from single-family homes to townhomes to mid- and high-rise multifamily buildings, be there for home ownership and for rental. And while I'm here today to announce the third edition of our biannual CHBA Municipal Benchmarking Study, I should note, given the events of the day and tariffs, I will speak to that towards the end of my comments. Back to the benchmarking study. This was studied by CHBA and delivered by the Altus Group, and it examines how local development processes, approvals, and charges impact housing affordability and housing supply in major markets across our country. It is now well documented that Canada is in a housing crisis of affordability and supply, with a lack of supply being a major driver of housing prices, along with municipal development taxes. Slow approval processes and delays further limit housing supply while also driving up prices, especially in today's higher financing cost world. Because these municipal issues directly affect the price of homes and how many homes are built, we felt it important to measure those impacts, compare cities, and point to best practices in cities that are doing well. This report provides objective analysis based on key performance indicators and municipal data to shed light on these issues and provide comparisons. It also points to ways that provincial and federal governments can continue to drive and support change at the municipal level to improve housing outcomes. The study benchmarks municipalities based on three development features: the length of time for residential development applications to move through the approval process, municipal fees charged on new residential development, and features in place to help applicants navigate that development application process. This edition of the study also provides further detail on how a municipality's performance on these measures influences housing outcomes, including affordability and availability of housing for young families. The study includes the indirect cost to the construction process that accumulate on a development as its application goes through the application process, with delays ultimately increasing the price of those housing units. Before I dive into the rankings themselves, it should be noted that the last edition came out in 2022 when the world was just emerging from the pandemic. While Canada has been struggling with housing affordability and not enough supply already for many years, the pandemic really focused attention on the importance of dealing with this. To that end, it should be noted that most of the municipalities who were contacted for this edition of the study were eager to provide the necessary information. And whether a municipality is at the top of our list or the bottom, each city can learn from best practices from others across the country and continue to improve. I'd like to highlight some of the key findings of the report before I move into the rankings. Firstly, the research for this third edition of the report consists of data collected from June 2022 to May 2024. The study therefore does not include impacts as a result of changes since then. Secondly, given that we have such a huge housing shortage in this country, it's noteworthy that construction activity in the municipality studies has not been able to keep up with population growth, widening our housing deficit. And very importantly, thirdly, housing affordability has worsened since the inaugural municipal benchmarking study for both rent and home ownership, making continued action and improvement imperative. Now, on to the rankings. Edmonton, Halifax, and London benchmark at the top of the list for overall rankings, indicating that they have only modestly high municipal fees, decent timelines, and a breadth of planning features. 7 out of the 9 bottom-performing municipalities are in Ontario, with the other 2 being Vancouver and Burnaby in British Columbia. In other words, where housing affordability is the worst and supply is the most needed, we have the lowest performing municipalities, hence the reason it is so important to improve. The study first looked at approval timelines. Delays in approvals impact housing affordability, and months of delays can add tens of thousands of dollars to the cost of a home. Approval timelines in this third edition have improved marginally, from the previous study, but do remain high. It took an average application 11.2 months to be approved in this study period, down 2.1 months from the last study. The municipality with the fastest timeline is Saskatoon at 2 months, while the municipality with the longest timeline is Hamilton at 31 months. The bottom 5 municipalities with the longest timeline are all from Ontario, while the top 5 municipalities are from either the Prairies or the Atlantic provinces. The municipality that saw the greatest improvement in timelines was Halifax, with a decrease of 11 months on average, and the municipality that saw the worst deterioration in timeline was Hamilton, with an increase of 8 months. Municipalities that have the shortest timelines reported that most development occurs in some form of as-of-right zoning, which enables development to occur according to the existing zoning regulations without needing any additional permits, variances, or discretionary approvals from the municipality, speeding up approvals and taking out much of the politics and NIMBYism from the development in these areas that can slow things down. This reinforces why CHBA continues to recommend that all municipalities implement much more as-of-right zoning. A key related issue related to timelines for approvals is the indirect costs and delays that come with them. Of course, the lengthier the approval time, the more costly the development. Every month it takes to approve a project means more money gets added onto each unit to finance the project during these delays. These costs include annual property taxes paid on the land, cost escalation, and opportunity costs of holding the land. In the 2024 study, the indirect costs of development application process for low-rise housing can add between $2,200 in Moncton per unit per month to a high of $10,000 in the City of Toronto per month. In terms of high-rise development, the indirect costs can add between $1,174 in Moncton per unit per month to a high of $6,855 in Vancouver. This reinforces why it is so important that timelines improve. The next section of the report, very importantly, looked at municipal charges and fees. There has been an increased attention on government-imposed fees on housing in recent times, and rightly so. Development charges are a major contributor to deteriorating housing affordability and a lack of supply in Canada's larger urban centres. Not surprisingly, and very unfortunately, these development taxes tend to be the highest, where affordability is the worst. While the mantra over the past decade has been growth must pay for growth, increasingly, these taxes and fees have expanded to support infrastructure and amenities far beyond what would be needed to address the impact of the new development itself, instead subsidizing the existing communities around them. And the fact is that municipalities that haven't dramatically increased their development taxes and have found more equitable ways to fund infrastructure have much better housing affordability, smaller housing supply deficits, and are now performing much better on housing outcomes overall. In terms of the numbers, development fees have gone up considerably across the municipalities studied. Municipal fees charged on new residential developments went up by an average of $27,000 for a low-rise home since the 2022 study, raising the new average in Canada for municipal fees in these cities to $82,600, with ranges from a low of $8,700 to a high in Toronto of $195,000 in development taxes. Municipal fees charged on new developments for high-rise went up an average of $3,000 since the 2022 study, raising the new average in Canada to $35,000, but with ranges from a low of $1,600 in Moncton to a high in Toronto of $134,900. Such a big number, it's hard to say. With Vancouver being not far behind at $122,200. These very high numbers are a big part of why housing has become so expensive in many of our larger municipalities in Canada, and demonstrate why it is so important that they be lowered. This will also mean that new funding models need to be found for those municipalities that have become too dependent on development taxes, and there are plenty of alternatives available. The final area to rank the municipalities in the benchmarking study is planning features. Each municipality is scored on whether they have features that can support an efficient planning approval system and increase clarity for developers and the public to more easily submit and work through the application process. There are three key themes on which cities were ranked in this area: application preparation, application submissions, and application tracking. On scoring, 12 municipalities have a combined score on these three themes of 70% or higher, with Halifax at the top of that list. 11 cities are below that 70% threshold, with an aggregate overall score for all of these features in all municipalities of 65%. Finally, to put the benchmark rankings in context, the report looks at housing outcomes. This edition of the study provides further details on how a municipality's performance on the study's metrics relate to these housing outcomes. A housing index to measure housing outcomes was created to build off of the following variables. Number one, housing affordability. This measures the share of income an average household would have to spend on ownership and rental costs. Number two, suppressed households. Affordability issues are resulting in significantly more people staying at home longer or living with roommates rather than forming new households. It is estimated that in Canada, roughly 48,000 suppressed households were in place in 2021, with a fifth of those in the City of Toronto. That number has likely quadrupled to over 200,000 in 2024. Number three is rental vacancy rate. The rental vacancy rate provides a barometer of supply in the market. Vacancy rates of 2 to 3% highlight a well-balanced market, while vacancy rates below this represent a tight rental market and means that rents are usually rising sharply. Only 6 of the 23 municipalities studied have a vacancy rate in this 2 to 3% range. All other municipalities were below 2%, indicating tighter rental markets. The fourth variable is the in and out migration from a city. Out-migration shows people are leaving, often a result of poor housing affordability and availability. Not surprisingly, most of the municipalities that score low on the Municipal Benchmarking Index have worse housing outcome indices too. For example, Edmonton ranks at the top of the overall score in the benchmarking study and, not surprisingly, has the best housing outcomes score. Better municipal processes, timelines, and lower fees lead directly to better affordability and availability. To conclude my remarks on the benchmarking study, there's a lot of useful information in this report, and we strongly encourage all levels of government to look at the findings to understand how our larger municipalities are faring in terms of their impact on affordability and supply. What are they doing well? What can they do better? And from whom can they learn to improve? Municipalities have a key role to play in addressing affordability challenges we are facing across the country, and municipal processes, delays, and government-imposed taxes are contributing to these challenges. Some municipalities are starting to make strides in improving, and we encourage all municipalities to do all that is possible to improve in these areas of the study to help create many more housing units that Canadians can afford. Now, as I said from the start, given the events surrounding the Trump tariffs today and in recent weeks, I did also want to take a few moments to address how these tariffs and the trade war that could happen with the U.S. will affect housing here in Canada. Firstly, as an industry, we are very concerned about the U.S. tariffs and certainly condemn the direction President Trump is taking, which will affect Canada, but will also drive up construction costs even more in the United States. While the U.S. tariffs of 25% on Canada will be problematic, they in and of themselves will have muted effect on construction costs here in Canada. What will affect our market more will be our own counter tariffs and, most importantly, the impact the U.S. tariffs will have on our overall economy, which in turn will affect housing starts. A slowing economy invariably means slower housing starts, which, as we've explained, will have expansive repercussions on housing supply, our industry, and long-term affordability. With respect to Canada's countervailing tariffs, we have been in dialogue with the Government of Canada, and our number one recommendation has been to avoid tariffs on construction materials to avoid increasing construction costs for housing. However, given the need to combat the U.S. tariffs with Canada's own tariffs, we're also working closely with the government to provide our best advice on how to best target U.S. imports with the minimum impact on Canadian business and construction costs. For example, by looking to product categories where there is ample supply from other countries to turn to. The number one objective in all of this needs to be to end the trade war as quickly as possible, but obviously on fair and acceptable terms for Canada. In the meantime, and related to our municipal benchmarking study, there are immediate steps that municipalities can take to offset any increased costs in construction from tariffs. This would include reducing development charges, which should happen anyway, but in most instances could more than offset any increased construction costs from the tariffs. Measures to speed up approval process can also offset costs from tariffs. And at the federal level, we've long called for fixes to the GST on new home construction. And again, those fixes could offset tariff costs and, like development taxes, should be fixed anyway. So with that, I will close. Thank you for being here, and I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Hi, Craig Lord, the Canadian Press. How long would these tariffs have to be in place or a trade war active before we start seeing a slowdown in housing starts in Canada?
I think that will depend on a few factors. One will be to what extent are the Canadian tariffs affecting things? What kind of measures are put in place by our own government? There has been talk of support for businesses, which would help. It's usually job insecurity or loss of jobs that really cause a slowdown that in turn translates to changes in housing starts. But the other big challenge too is some of these impacts are already starting to happen because of loss of consumer confidence. So even before markets start to change and prices start to go up, people feel uncertain and therefore less interested in making those kinds of investments. So there are a lot of variables. They're probably already sneaking into the market now, and we still have a bit of a slow market despite the fact interest rates are coming down, and we would expect that'll continue to worsen as the trade war continues, if it does.
Second question, related to the Housing Accelerator Fund, have you seen any progress in municipalities in lowering these barriers to construction as a result of what the federal government has been doing with the Accelerator Fund?
Yes, we have. And unfortunately, the study period ended before some of those changes were really starting to take effect. But we are seeing changes in approval processes. We're seeing some pretty dramatic changes in zoning that is going to allow things to this as-of-right zoning approach, for example, for multiplexes and stopping having exclusively single-family neighborhoods. More digital processing of permits are happening in some places. So we do see that starting to take effect. And we have also seen, not enough, but a couple municipalities actually start to lower their development taxes, which is going to be really critical to help affordability.
Sorry, Greg Quinn, Market News. We've seen the federal government or different federal leaders talk about development charges to say we'll either withhold money or we'll give them money if they do things that supposedly advance housing construction. Are those things working? And more generally, is this kind of friction between governments helpful or hurtful in getting things done?
I would say at this stage it's a necessary friction. And we are seeing slowly but surely the recognition, because the first step is this recognition, right? And so when the federal government comes forward and says, we're not going to provide funding unless you make these changes, that's a really important dialogue. And obviously not a popular one if you're in a municipality or a province that doesn't want to make these changes. But the fact of the matter is the development taxes at municipal level are out of control. And the fact of the matter is there are opportunities to change. And one of the things we would say is we recognize municipalities need to fund this infrastructure, need to fund these amenities. The question is how. And the point is doing it on new construction and only on new construction when these things benefit the entire community is not fair, and it's causing affordability issues, and it's causing lack of supply. So the discussion is hugely important. And, if you're going to, the part of the discussion from the federal government was just to freeze fees, and that's causing an issue, let alone actually reduce. So it's got to be an ongoing dialogue. We need to get to the point where municipalities, A, recognize this, and it's starting. We're seeing municipalities in the GTA actually start to lower DCs. And then secondly, we do need to work with all three levels of government to figure out, well, how are we going to finance these things? Because the fact of the matter is, when you look at where development taxes are the worst, it's in our largest cities. It's in the GTA. It's in the Lower Mainland and BC. In places where municipalities were able to say, well, house prices are skyrocketing, and people are still buying them. So we can continue to increase our development taxes probably beyond what was necessary, but it was doable. We're not in that world anymore. And those cities are facing the biggest challenges. So it's time to find a new model that is more equitable. So back to your original question, is this a problematic friction? It's a necessary friction. It's a necessary dialogue. And if everybody works together, there are definitely solutions to be found.
And you mentioned Ontario's kind of the laggard with municipalities. Is that a municipality thing, or is that a provincial? Like, you know, what makes Ontario and its municipalities the bad offenders here?
It is, you know, the offenders, if we're going to call them offenders, you know, it really is occurring at that municipal level. But there are opportunities for the province to help out, shall we say. You know, there is the provincial, each province has their planning acts. And certainly our, you know, our Ontario Home Builders Association and our association in Toronto, Build GTA, they've just released a study not long ago that is specifically about the Planning Act and how do we go in at that provincial level to make changes, to make things better, to change the rules a little bit, and also there's sort of a change the way municipalities work, help the way municipalities work, create a different kind of playing field that can really help in all of these areas.
Thank you. This concludes the press conference. Merci. C'est ce qui conclut cette conférence de presse.
Thank you.